Matt will be continuing our sermon series. I think we're very close to the end on 1 Corinthians, and I'll be reading now from 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verses 1 to 12. Pursue love and earnestly desire the spiritual gifts, especially that you may prophesy. For one who speaks in a tongue speaks not to men, but to God. For no one understands him, but he utters mysteries in the Spirit. On the other hand, the one who prophesies speaks to people for their upbuilding and encouragement and consolation. The one who speaks in a tongue builds up himself, but the one who prophesies builds up the church. Now, I want you all to speak in tongues, but even more to prophesy. The one who prophesies is greater than the one who speaks in tongues, unless someone interprets, so the church may be built up. Now, brothers, if I come to you and speaking in tongues, how will I benefit you unless I bring you some revelation or knowledge or prophecy or teaching? If even lifeless instruments, such as the flute or the harp, do not give distinct notes, how will anyone know what is played? And if the bugle gives an indistinct sound, who will get ready for battle? So with yourselves, if with your tongue you utter speech that is not intelligible, how will anyone know what is said? For you will be speaking into the air. There are doubtless many different languages in the world, and none is without meaning. But if I do not know the meaning of the language, I will be a foreigner to the speaker, and the speaker a foreigner to me. So with yourselves, since you are eager for manifestations of the Spirit, strive to excel in building up the church.
Morning, everyone. How you doing? Good. My name is Matt. Just in case we haven't met, I'd like to, again, welcome you to our Sunday morning service. It's great to have you with us this morning. I'm one of the leaders here at MCC, and this morning we'll be continuing our sermon series on 1 Corinthians. A couple of weeks ago, I went and saw one of my long-term favourite artists, the singer-songwriter Ryan Adams. And that's Ryan Adams, okay? So don't bother hitting me up afterwards with some funny joke. I've heard them all. Did he sing Summer of '69? Is it the Timu version of Bryan Adams? I've heard it all. So we paid our money well in advance, and we turned up to the beautiful Hamer Hall in Melbourne, along with about 250 other people. Admittedly, mostly middle-aged guys, admittedly mostly wearing way too much denim and flannel, and admittedly mostly probably desperately wishing that the early 2000s were still around. So we sat in our seats and we listened really reverentially for about 2 hours. We applauded and we cheered at the right times. And he, by the way, was great for the majority of the first set. But then last song of the first set, he had a complete meltdown on stage, and he abused the audience, he abused the Hamer Hall staff, and some of the crowd, and then stormed off early. Came back for the second set, was a complete disaster, had this big meltdown on stage and left early when he saw so many other people of the crowd leaving at the same time. You may have heard about it. It made the news. He said that Australia was the worst country in the world to tour ever. So I spent far too much of my life since then going through the numerous Reddit threads that have popped up in the wake of the show, and they all have this uniform tone, and that is, it was terrible, it was a travesty, it was a complete betrayal. And why am I sharing this with you? I'm sharing it with you because this relatively extreme example highlights the presumptions, the mindset that I had when I walked into that show. The kind that's typical when a fan like me goes to a concert. I want to compare that mindset and those presumptions to that of those that we take into a church service. So my mindset when it came to this concert was pretty much this. I financially contributed to this event. I turn up and I spectate. I mean, I offer the appropriate encouragement every once in a while with a cheer and a clap, but I'm largely a spectator. I consume the content that's provided, and then afterwards I assess whether it met my expectations, whether I was satisfied with what was delivered, what I paid my money for. So on one really profound level, I'm a consumer. And in this example, I didn't get to consume what I thought I deserved, hence the outrage and me burning all the merch when I got home. So the lens through which I viewed this concept was very much, what's in it for me? What's in it for me? Now, the Apostle Paul, the author of this letter to the church in Corinth, he is writing this letter to the church partly because he thinks that they are at risk of bringing that kind of similar consumer mindset into their church meetings. So over the last couple of talks in this series, we've talked about spiritual gifts and the way that they can be misused in order to boost status and ego within a church. In this chapter, Paul particularly hones in on two spiritual gifts, tongues and prophecy. And these seem to be two examples of gifts that are particularly prone to being misused or also being used to help build up the church. So they're two gifts that are often conducive to spiritual immaturity and maturity. But I'm going to argue that these two gifts are just examples of a broader point that I think Paul is making in this letter. So to be clear, particularly if you haven't caught many of the sermons in this series, I am pro-tongues, and this church is pro-tongues. But particularly with the gift of tongues, context, I think, is everything. Context is everything. So today, I want to bring 4 marks of what I see as Christian maturity, Christian spiritual maturity that come out of this passage, 1 Corinthians 14. And I want to show you how I think these 4 marks differ from what I'd label spiritual consumerism. Now, if you're a visitor, if you're on the fence about Christianity, if you don't believe or follow the faith, that's absolutely okay. I'm hoping that there will be some general good wisdom for living like a good and fulfilling life here for you as well. So please stick around to the end. So this is where we'll be going. I want to look at don't stop at good, go for greater. Worship as a whole person. Be visitor conscious and alert. And pursue self-control and self-awareness. I think these are 4 marks of Christian spiritual maturity when it comes to church gatherings. So let's dive in. And please, if you've got your Bibles, which hopefully you do, crack them open to 1 Corinthians 14. And we'll start at number 1. So don't stop at good, but go for the greater gifts. Don't stop at good, but go for the greater gifts. If you look at the start of chapter 14 there, we've come from 1 Corinthians 13, the famous love chapter. And at the start of chapter 14, Paul reiterates again the importance of love, particularly in relation to spiritual gifts. So he says desiring spiritual gifts is a good thing. Everyone should be desiring spiritual gifts. But then he says to the church as a whole, because again, we've got to remember that he's addressing not just individuals, but the church community as a whole. He says, desire particularly the spiritual gift of prophecy. Now, if you've been paying close attention to this series on spiritual gifts, you could be forgiven for thinking that I've said that all the gifts are equal in importance. Now, it can be confusing because I've definitely said that just because you've got one gift and I have another doesn't make us one more spiritual than the other. So just because I've got one gift and you've got another doesn't make either of us more valuable in the eyes of God or more spiritual in the eyes of God. But, and here's the really important distinction. The gift you have may be more valuable to the building up of the church in a communal context. Does that make sense? The gift may be more valuable for building up the church in a gathered context. Paul makes it clear in 1 Corinthians 14 that whilst all the gifts are good, some are more valuable to the church as a whole than the others in the context of the church being gathered together in a large corporate meeting like this. Specifically, in 1 Corinthians 14, tongues are good. Tongues are really good. Paul says he desires that everyone would speak in tongues. But at a gathered church level, like the equivalent of a Sunday morning, prophecy is better. That doesn't mean that those with the gift of prophecy are better than those who don't have that gift. Instead, it's a value judgment about the gift itself in the right context, not the person who bears that gift. It's a value judgment about the gift itself for a particular context, not the person who bears that gift. Is that making sense? That's really crucially important. So that begs the question, why may prophecy be more valuable than tongues in a collective like church gathering? I don't have time to go back over what prophecy is, see the prior talks on that, but in summary, prophecy can be defined as bringing God's timeless truths as found in the Bible to bear on specific circumstances and contexts, with the results that specific people at specific times and places are encouraged and built up. And crucially, Paul says it's intelligible. It can be understood. So here's one of the key differences between tongues that aren't interpreted and prophecy. You'll see it in 1 Corinthians 14, 2-3. For one who speaks in a tongue speaks not to men, people, but to God, for no one understands him. But he utters mysteries in the Spirit. On the other hand, the one who prophesies speaks to people for their upbuilding and encouragement and consolation. Why does this matter to Paul? Again, let's remember the context. He's addressing the church in Corinth, and he's writing specifically about how they should conduct themselves when they're gathered together, when they meet together. He's like effectively writing about how to handle their Sunday morning service equivalents, complete with the expectation and the possibility that visitors, non-Christians, will walk in and witness what's going on. And critically for Paul, this matters because the end game of these meetings, one of the major goals of coming together, in addition to bringing God glory, is that we collectively are built up as a church, not just fulfilled as individuals, but collectively we as a church are built up. And you can see that in verses such as 3-5. The one who speaks in a tongue builds up himself, but the one who prophesies builds up the church. Now I want you all to speak in tongues, but even more to prophesy. The one who prophesies is greater than the one who speaks in tongues unless someone interprets, so that the church may be built up. Paul is after the church, when we meet together collectively, to be built up. And also in verse 12, so with yourselves, since you were eager for the manifestations of the Spirit, spiritual gifts, strive to excel in building up the church. So here's the takeaway. Desire spiritual gifts, including tongues. Pray for them. Exercise them if you possess them. But realize there's a hierarchy when it comes to their usefulness in a gathered collective church meeting. They're all good, but some are better. Why? Because they're more likely to build up other people. Why? Because they're intelligible. They're relatable. People can understand them, and there's less risk of feeling alienated. So I started off with a concert analogy. Let's go with a sporting one, and this may actually resemble more of a church meeting than a concert. So imagine you're at the AFL Grand Final. You've got your comrades to your left and to your right. You're there to celebrate and encourage each other and your team. So what do? You chant. You maybe sing. You bust out a Mexican wave. You do that together. You do that communally, collectively. Here's what you don't do. You don't chant or sing something that no one else can understand or participate in. You don't do solo Mexican waves at random. Given the group context, you do something that is intelligible and relatable to the person that is sitting right next to you. If you're speaking in a tongue, a language that no one else can understand, that isn't interpreted, it won't be intelligible. Others won't be able to relate to it. Others won't be able to assent to it. Others won't be encouraged by it directly. You won't be building up your fellow fans, so to speak. So, desire the greater gifts when it comes to church meetings. The second mark of a spiritual person in this passage, or spiritual maturity, I should say, is worshipping as a whole person. And by whole person, I mean both spirit and mind, to use Paul's language, without favouring one over the other. So look at what Paul writes there in verse 14. For if I pray in a tongue, my spirit prays, but my mind is unfruitful. What am I to do? I will pray with my spirit, but I will pray with my mind also. I will sing praise with my spirit, but I will sing with my mind also. Tongues in this sense seems to involve the spirit, but not so much the mind. The mind for Paul means that you can articulate something, that you can make something you're feeling and thinking intelligible. To only rely on the mind would lead to a shallow, emotionally dead spirituality. But to only rely on the Spirit is at risk of being way too subjective and individualistic. Paul doesn't want one or the other. Paul wants the riches, the comprehensive faith, the full package of both. He wants spirit and mind. Tongues by themselves as a private prayer language have their place. But again, in this example, according to this passage, they seem to be pure spirit, not even intelligible to the person who's praying with them. I personally reckon all of us tilt one way or the other, more than the other. So those of you who know me, you know that my risk is that I'm mind biased. I'm not like naturally kind of spirit-led enough. I try to be conscious of that. I know that I need to compensate for that. I need to compensate with that by directly engaging in things that move my heart and my spirit. What about you? Which way are you likely to tilt? And notice, Paul here isn't so much concerned with the individual. It's not so much a case of, look, it's bad for Matt if he doesn't worship with his spirit and his mind. It's more a case of, it's bad for other people if Matt doesn't worship with his spirit and his mind. And you see this in verse 19. Nevertheless, in church, I would rather speak 5 words with my mind in order to instruct others than 10,000 words in a tongue. So Paul's concern is that if you tilt one way at the exclusion of the other people alongside you will suffer because of that. And notice again that this is, he says it explicitly, in church. So presumably it's different when you're worshipping by yourself at home. It may be different, like in a small group perhaps, but Paul is speaking against the context of a large public church meeting. So he says, worship is a whole person so that others may benefit. Worship is a whole person so that others may benefit. The third mark of maturity from this passage is being visitor conscious and alert. So look at verses 23 through to 25 here. If therefore the whole church comes together and all speak in tongues and outsiders or unbelievers enter, will they not say that you were out of your minds? But if all prophesy and an unbeliever or outsider enters, he is convicted by all. He is called to account by all. The secrets of his heart are disclosed. And so falling on his face, he will worship God and declare that God is really among you. So Paul puts one scenario, which is less desirable, and then follows it up with another, which is more ideal. This is a plea from Paul, not to be indulgent in ways that unnecessarily, but understandably, put curious seekers or visitors off. Sunday mornings, like these services, they are not the equivalent of in-house get-togethers. This isn't just the equivalent of a kind of extended family gathering. It's definitely not a country club. We should hope, we should pray, that we should expect that we'll be joined by visitors. And we want to be assured that what is conveyed here is intelligible. That is, it's so understandable to someone who walks in that best case scenario, they will be convicted, they'll get it, and they too will start following Jesus. Or worst case scenario, they will disagree with what they hear being conveyed here. But they'll know exactly what it is and why they're disagreeing because it's intelligible. Does that make sense? You follow? That's why I personally feel so strongly about in-jokes, jargon, and over-familiarity. They can be unnecessarily and unintentionally off-putting to people who are checking us out. Visitors come in with a mindset something like, do I have a place here? Would I have a home here going forward? And they are making that assessment in real time. Visitors walk into a place like this and they're clued into signs that we are expecting them, that their presence here is not a surprise to us, but we've been expecting them. That's a good sign, yeah? We need to be visitor conscious and alert. And the fourth and last mark of spiritual maturity is self-control and self-awareness. So after this, if you want to, go through particularly verses 26 to 33 for the details. But Paul is outlining how a church gathering like this should operate. So 3 sharing of tongues at the most, assuming that someone can interpret them. 2 or 3 prophets should share with the idea that what they've said is weighed up and considered. So once again, this isn't a cult. And everything is guided by the overall principle that everything should be done to build up the church as a whole. And some degree of order is required for this, i.e., it can't be chaos and confusion. And it won't be chaos and confusion because individuals will exercise self-control and awareness. So as an example of this, Paul writes in verse 32 and 33, "And the spirits of prophets are subject to prophets, for God is not a God of confusion, but of peace." So earlier in the passage, he says, those who have the gift of tongues can choose to silence them. He also writes, those who have the gift of prophecy can silence themselves as well. Why? For the greater good. And how? Because their spirits are still under their control. And here is what I find, this is like the genuinely awe-inspiring and humbling principle from these verses. God wants to partner with us. He doesn't want to possess us. God wants to partner with us. He doesn't want to possess us. He wants to use you. He wants to empower you with his spirit to do things you couldn't do in your own strength. But he will not override your free will and the responsibility that comes with that in order to do so. Does that make sense? He wants to partner with you. He's not going to dominate or possess you. That's amazing. So the spiritually mature person won't be using the God made me do it card to justify their lack of self-awareness, their lack of self-control, or their bad behaviour. For example, if I start using 6-syllable words up here, or if I get just unreasonably angry or frustrated, I can't write it off as just, look, it's my gifting, man. I had to go with it. Or for example, if I had a word of knowledge, if I shared a word of knowledge like, look, there's someone in the room, a guy, and God wants you to know that he can deliver you from your extreme porn addiction. And by the way, he's wearing a Hawaiian shirt. And you're the only person in the room wearing a Hawaiian shirt, that would be completely irresponsible. I couldn't get away with that by saying, look, I was being carried away by the Spirit. What could I do? No. They're extreme examples, but hopefully they make a point. A mature Christian doesn't use their gifting as an excuse not to be self-controlled and aware. It sounds almost trite, but it's probably a case of a mature Christian will read the room. How is this likely to land? Will others likely benefit from what I am being led to share or contribute? So we need to be self-controlled, we need to be self-aware. So there, what I see is 4 marks from this passage. And you may understandably be thinking right now, man, Matt, are you asking me to be that conscious and switched on about how I conduct myself here on a Sunday morning? I can't even just collapse in a pew, check out and relax after a hectic week. And I'd say if you've got aspirations to spiritual maturity, then yeah, that's what's being asked. And I get it, I really do. Generally, over most of the time, that's what I'm asking. But people go through seasons. Sometimes life will demand of you that Sunday services are purely a place where you turn up, you get served, and you're fed. I get that. Life can be demanding. That's completely okay. But if that's your current approach to Sunday morning services and that hasn't changed over the past 3 years, that's not a good sign. When it comes to Sunday services or any other kind of public open gathering where Christians gather, there's some kind of a scale of ideal attitudes and behaviour. And I think this is what Paul is getting at when he says in verse 20, brothers and sisters, do not be children in your thinking. In your thinking, be mature. There's childlike thinking and then there's mature thinking. And I think you could frame it up something like this as a scale. If you're exploring faith, if you're not really sure what you think about Christianity, if you're a newer Christian, of course, your approach to a church service will be something like me considering a concert. What's in this for me? Will this work for me? And I completely get that. That, if you like, is the kind of like the early childlike end of the spectrum. It's understandable. It's perfectly okay for a time. But then perhaps it shifts with growing maturity. It moves to something like, how can I use my gifts here? I know I'm gifted in this regard. What can I do? And that's definitely heading in the right direction. But even that can go askew. We can misread the degree of our gifting. We can think that our gift is always going to be with us as opposed to a season of life. Or we can wrap too much of our identity up with our gifts. It can become too much about us rather than the people who we're meant to be serving. Which leads to perhaps the most mature take on this. How can I best serve the people around me here on a Sunday morning? That's going to mean listening to people. That's going to mean getting feedback from your gifts and how they're being received, how they could be honed. It's going to mean reading the room. It's probably going to mean some degree of sacrifice and even downward mobility. And that sounds pretty grim, right? Particularly if you're not a Christian this morning, if you're on the fence, you may be thinking, understandably, this sounds like a servile, demeaning way to live, being so exclusively focused on other people. What about me? But get this, and here's some good news, regardless of what you believe. More and more social research, and I'm talking like at least 146 plus studies, the findings of which were compiled in this excellent book, The Good Life, which I highly recommend. 148 plus studies that have now been conducted over decades of time conclude that friendships and social connections have profound benefits for health and longevity. Close friends, if you have a network of close friends, it can literally decrease the risk of dying from all causes by up to a fourth. Just think about that. So that's the first big point here. Social connectedness and good friendships are great for a good life. And social science also points us towards how to be a good friend. And get this, like the clues for how to be a good friend, focused attention on other people. Focused attention on other people. Traits like curiosity, empathy, and generosity. If you've got a kind of posture towards other people that is curious, empathetic, and really generous, it is likely to foster close friendships. So you see the connection there, right? Having a generous posture towards others, being focused on them, as opposed to having a consumer mindset, what's in this for me, is actually good for us. It's good for you as an individual over the long term. It leads to social connection. That's what social science is indicating. And social connection leads to a good, long, healthy life. Christianity has recognized that wisdom for thousands of years. We believe that God himself, in the person of Jesus, exemplified this. He said, "Whoever wants to be great must become a servant. Whoever wants to be first among you must be your slave." That is what the Son of Man, Jesus, has done. He came to serve, not to be served, and then to give away his life in exchange for the many who were held hostage. This all sounds pretty easy. It sounds easy to kind of be focused on others and have this kind of maturity, but obviously it's not in practice. We can't do this kind of thing alone. It's a really hard call to have an other-centered life that's committed to the same group of people over the long term. And that's why we need Jesus. Jesus, who humbled himself for your sake, can help you and has to help you be able to have the same attitudes towards others. So if you'd like to know more, if you want to explore a good way to live, again, a way that will get you kind of less chance of being self-occupied and hung up on ourselves, but instead will lead to you being connected to other people and finding a good, satisfying life in that, and like to actually be more human from it, I'd encourage you, please come up the front here afterwards. Someone like myself or someone else would love to pray with you down here and help you explore how you can find out more about Christianity, more about Jesus, and how to live a life that sounds so paradoxical, but again, with that laying down of our preferences, of our primary desires, will actually lead to the most fulfilling, satisfying way to live. Come and grab someone afterwards. That'd be great. Let me pray. Father, I thank you for this wisdom. I thank you that the way to actually have a truly satisfying and more human life doesn't come with pursuing self-fulfillment and approaching life with the question of what's in this for me, but instead comes about by loving and trying to focus and pay our attention and give empathy towards other people. I thank you that you haven't left us alone in this task, but through the example of your Son, his life and his death, his resurrection and his Spirit, that we can gradually over time change with your help and become more and more the other-directed, selflessly giving creatures who you want us to be. And thank you that we have each other to encourage each other in this task as well. Amen.